Welcome to the 42nd Ask the Chief Forum. Today we're going to do a subject that I think that everyone finds quite interesting and mysterious. The questions will be about ghosts. So we can get started with the first question. Spin the wheel.
Number 13.
Number 13.
I have number 13.
Okay.
So the question is, why do Satanists or witches do rituals in haunted places?
Oh, okay. Why do witches and Satanists do rituals in haunted places? Basically, because they feel that there's vortexes there, there's doorways in those particular areas. And usually, before they will do something like that, someone would probably either psychically pick up that there are spirits there or ghosts there. But primarily, it has to do with doorways. So, as far as like these rituals, it seems like I don't know the question that we want to know any more about some of the rituals and sacrificial rituals and things like that. But it spans from animal rituals, and the most intense is human sacrifice, animal sacrifice. But also, I've found recently that they also there are those who will sacrifice other entities, which means that there are other entities, always other entities involved with witches and Satanists. So with witches, you know that a lot of witches, those who practice a certain type of witchcraft, have familiars, which means most times there are entities on the other side, or there are entities that will get into animals that they might have around them as well. So the answer would be because they feel that there are vortexes in these places or doorways in these places. Um, the thing is that there are doorways in pretty much everywhere on Dunia. Unless you know how to close them, they just stay open all the time. So that's pretty much what I have on that question. So we can go to the next one. I'm going to spin that wheel.
Coming. Number 8.
Number 8.
Okay.
Oh.
What ghosts do to research the people they are haunting?
Do ghosts research the people that they're haunting?
Yes.
That I guess would be me bringing up that movie Monsters Inc. That there are an existing dossier on everyone in the Matrix. So they basically decide on maybe what a person's energy levels as to whether they're going to haunt them in a certain way. So it is true that they do decide on some level who they're going to haunt. But of course, there's a whole lot of them. So there's these hauntings are going on basically all the time. And sometimes it's passive hauntings where they're just basically around a person, and that person, or I'm quite sure everyone has felt this at some point, where they walk into a space and they feel as though there's someone in that space with them, or there's someone in that space with you, that but you don't see anyone. You're in what you consider to be an empty room or an empty space, but you feel like there's somebody looking at you, or sometimes it's gotten to the point where you can feel like there's a crowd in an empty space. So as far as but the kind of haunting, that passive haunting means that it just makes you feel uncomfortable. And so any feelings that you have of discomfort goes along with all the other emotions like anger, jealousy, and so on and so forth. But this one has to do with this discomfort and insecurity. And that puffs out a certain type of essence. So they'll just hang around, sometimes they'll, in other words, move away from you for a bit so you can get comfortable, and then they come back into your space again. And then you start to feel uncomfortable. Every time you start feeling uncomfortable, you start to puff out this energy that they will collect. And I've mentioned before that the whole idea, the whole purpose of the matrix, as far as density is concerned, is literally a processing factory for energy, for essence. So they're more interested in your essence than they are in anything else. And there are times that they will actually create scenarios where part of your scenario may be that at some point in your life experience, you're going to experience hauntings. Now, as far as I don't know if there's a question having to do. I don't think there's a question on the wheel that has to do with people who don't claim not to feel or have experienced ghosts. A lot of times that has to do with the levels of energy in their higher consciousness. Usually, the less energy in their higher consciousness, the less they feel. And also, people who tend to say that they don't see or they don't feel anything, sometimes they're lying, they're in denial about it. But those who literally don't, it means that their energy levels are so low. And also, they have a certain type of personality that you might notice if you know people like that. Just pay attention to their behavior and how they are as people, and that will give you some idea of the levels of their higher consciousness, how much is in there, how close I would say their higher consciousness is to becoming black ooze. Okay. So again, as far as like them deciding, there's a number of different ways that they function. It's just like how we do things. Everybody here does things differently from one another. So you have 100 or 1,000 people, but none of them do things exactly the same. They might be interested in some similar things, but never straight across the board. So as far as like the ghost realm, they don't do things exactly the same. It varies. It's like stories in other words, people like stories. We like movies or books with interesting stories or whatever, whether those stories are true or not. It's literally it's the same way with them. They create these scenarios for you throughout your time here. And at some point, the jockey may lead you to moving into a certain place. There are individuals who will talk about seeing a house, and the house may be kind of creepy, but something speaks to them. That they must have that house. Something about that house is calling to me. So it has to do with whatever is connected and whatever is part of the scenario that has been written for you as to whether you end up in certain places that someone like myself, I would sense a place and I'd say there's no way that you're going to have a peaceful time in this place. Now, as far as for me, I've every place literally is capable of being haunted. In most cases, in the past, they were all haunted to some degree. There are people in the same families where some of them are experiencing hauntings and others are not. Again, that has to do with their levels of higher consciousness energy as to whether you're going to experience, a haunting, and then basically the other person does not experience hauntings. Now, I don't know if there's something having to do with men when grown men, where there's a number of them, either they claim not to feel or see anything, but usually children and women, a lot of women tend to actually have a heightened sense to be able to experience a haunting. And I would hazard to say, well, with usually someone's experiencing a feminine or female expression, a lot of times they have a little higher consciousness energy than most men. Not all men have lower levels of higher consciousness energy, but it seems like more women do, and children do, because they're beginning another expression where the density starts to tap into that, into their higher consciousness energy. And so what happens throughout a lifetime, they slowly deplete your higher conscious energy. And they do it through numerous lifetimes. Depending on how much energy you have, depends on how many lifetimes they take. It takes for them to literally drain you of all of your essence. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, want me to clarify any more or add any to it, you can just let me know. Okay. All right, then. Good enough. Get ready for the wheel. Next question, spin the wheel. All right, number 4.
Question 4. What is considered the most effective form of glamour or disguise, such as the image of a woman in a white dress?
Okay, well, one of the things, excuse me, one of the things that those who actually are in the ghost realm, in the ghost guild, and literally, as far as like, there's a question, I don't know if that question is what is a ghost, but as far as what they tell me from the other side, they say a ghost is just another dense entity. That's their job as a dense entity. So there's these others that they, on various levels that do other things, So each density has its own job. Some, I would say a lot of them interact with humans, for lack of a better word, what a human is. But there are those that are behind the scenes that organize what some of the other ones do. Those who keep track of the records, and those are the records that some psychics call the Akashic records. Now, there is such thing as Akashic records, but those records only have to do with the matrix. You're not going to get any answers from outside of the matrix, out in the broader universe. You're just going to get answers from within the matrix. And in most cases, they will know if you're looking into the Akashic records, and they will regulate or basically limit whatever information that you're going to get from those records. So every time someone calls up the Akashic records, they're calling up a dense entity to basically recite it to them, whatever answers that they want. So with that said, those entities will give you whatever answers they want to give you. There are a lot of times that they will lie and give you, mistruths, but to them, it's just basically to keep you preoccupied and keep you stuck in the matrix. Sometimes they get bored and they just want to have a little fun with you. So all of a sudden, oh, well, there's a lot of different examples of it, but they'll tell you something very outlandish. And, and they'll tell you over and over again to the point where you believe it. And then, there are others who will, hear what you're saying and say that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But the reality of the matter is that the matrix doesn't make any sense, to tell the truth. But can you repeat the question though?
Okay. What is considered the most effective form of glamour or disguise, such as the image of a woman in a white dress?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was really quick to move away from that. So glamours, as I call, glamour is literally what one sees. In other words, everyone here in this world has a glamour. So I think there's a technique that called show me the real, where in your mind's eye you can start to see a person's glamour start to deteriorate, and they end up looking like something that doesn't even look human. You can do it to yourself also. You can actually, if you dare look into a mirror that long and see the change also by saying, show me the real. So what they do, excuse me, what those who do their ghost haunting job, what they'll do, they'll find a costume or a glamour that suits a certain situation. So, for instance, there's a lot of ladies in white that are all over the place, mostly in the West, and and we'll consider the United States part of the West as well, where they said there's a woman in white, who's strolling through an old house or something like that, or in Europe, like an old castle or something of that sort. Now, one of the things to know is that you're never seeing, if you go into a certain place and you see the lady in white, 9 times out of 10, you're not seeing the exact same lady in white, because they can change their glamour. So they can change their glamour from being a shadow man or shadow person, extremely tall shadow person, all the way down to a creepy little kid ghost. So as far as like we're talking about how they decide to haunt someone, they just very similar to Monsters Inc., which I don't think that they expected it to be used in this way to basically describe pretty much a good aspect of what they do. With the dossier, they had a dossier on like a iPad or something like that, that they would look at the kid or look at the person, and usually they were haunting kids, and they'll know if the kid has a dog or or what the kid tends to be afraid of, and so on and so forth. And so whatever that person is afraid of, that's what they're going to present to them. So literally they change up depending on what the job is. So if I'm doing manual labor, I'm going to wear steel-toed boots and a hard hat and so on and so forth to go to work. If I am basically walking in an office, I may wear a suit and a tie and and dress shoes and so on and so forth. No difference. They can switch images just like that. And sometimes people think that there's more than one haunter in a place. And a lot of times there will be, but sometimes it can be one haunter changing how he or she or how it looks. Okay. All right. So we're going to go to, yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Like in
Sure.
movies, they show quite often that when a person transitions and they're, I don't know, not ready to leave and stuff like that they stay in this realm as a ghost. Is that a real thing, or is it just made up?
Well, as far as like what the haunters have told me, they said that's not real. They said that's just a story. So they're all about preoccupying people with stories. So there's a number of La Llorona is one that I think from Latin America, where there's a woman who supposedly ended up killing her kids because her husband had literally dumped her for another woman, and she killed his kids and drowned them, and then realized what she'd done. Sorry, realized what she had done, and then you'll hear her, at some river or something, walking along the shores and crying and calling for her children and so on and whatever. And that's just literally a story. It's like a performance. And the purpose of the performance is to creep the heck out of a human. Therefore, they get essence from that individual. Also, they get residual essence from it by the story being relayed to others. Saying, "We don't go there. There's a ghost there that'll, and then they'll add to it. Sometimes some adults add to it to keep their kids from, like running around in the forest at night. And they'll say, well, something gets you and it'll eat you or whatever, and you'll disappear forever and so on. But literally, those are just literally stories that are put together to facilitate feeding. So as far as I know, whenever I check, those stories are never true. They're all a performance. So, I mean, for them, they don't, when I talk about this stuff, they never really like me talking about it. But things are different now. No one's really trying to prevent me from talking about that. They try to prevent me from talking about other things. So your question had to do with whether these stories are real or not. Is that correct?
Yes.
Almost.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as I know, they're not real. But again, they're not doing anything any different from how a parental unit will basically lie to their kid about something. You know, let's see, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, the big one in the West, Santa Claus. They're all, you know, they're all fake. And when you get to a certain age as a kid, you find that those things are fake. You know, I don't know any adult who believes in Santa Claus. So I'm literally more or less maturing you up even higher to a point where you to realize that the other side are just jerking you around. What they're doing is no different from a parental unit telling you that there's the Easter Bunny and that there's Santa Claus. You know, but they don't want it, they didn't want it, and they still, you know, those who are kind of left maybe bumping around in that zone, they don't want you to know about it because that interferes with, you know, with them getting the essence. You know, as money is to people here, essence is the same to them. So if individuals don't believe it or challenge it, they get less essence from them. Or they get you to release less essence, or you end up releasing less essence, especially when you bypass the fear program that is instilled in you by density. If you're able to bypass it with how you think about things. So there are individuals who, you know, it's like some people get over fear of heights, you know, or you know any of the other phobias. You know, some people just embrace them and stay in it, but you can't overcome any of those kinds of phobias. And so when you overcome those phobias, you cease to release your essence. Which basically, every time you release your essence, that means there's less essence for you to continue to operate on. Okay. Do I need to clarify anything? Is that okay?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the question. Okay, we're going to move to the next question. I'm going to spin the wheel. Spin that wheel. Okay, question 7.
What natural smells from plants, tree resin, sage repel density?
Okay, yeah, that's a question that a lot of people have. They're mistaking some of these herbs and smells as something to literally get rid of ghosts. But what it does is like there's an atmosphere of density in a place that may not be connected. Well, in other words, it's connected on something to, let's see, it's connected to the matrix. The matrix is a foul place. So even if there's not a spirit or ghost in place, there can be the foul smell, so to speak, of that, or the foul energy of that. And that's when you can use certain there are certain herbs and things like that. One of the ones I think is overused, um, almost like when people use ayahuasca, you know, say, "Oh, ayahuasca will take you on these trips, and you'll see all these, you know, cool things or interesting things." And they say, "Oh, just ayahuasca," but you have to have a certain type of ayahuasca to have the proper experience. So as far as with sage is concerned, I know First Nations people say that it's best to have it gifted to you. But whenever I talk to any of these entities on the other side, I ask, does sage work? And they say, nah, it doesn't work. I said, well, why do people use it? I said, because we told them to use it. In other words, it's like you asking the prison warden, how do I escape the prison? So when people are, you know, even psychically connecting to something on the other side, most of the times, if not all the time, with certain individuals, they're connecting to something that's dense. And I don't know if you follow any, there's a lot of stories out now. There's a lot of podcasts with a lot of these stories, and you'll get a lot of stories where people have used sage and they've used, certain whatever, even crystals and things like that, and still find that they have a so-called ghost problem. Or it will trip them up and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to go on vacation for a little while, let them feel really secure. So what they do, they'll leave, but it's not that that it's driving them away. They're just making you think that it's driving them away, but they always come back. So what happens when you feel, oh, I think I got rid of them. I'm gonna relax. Oh, before it's just kind of creepy, But when they come back, not only is it creepy, now you're feeling kind of defeated or frustrated, which means it adds another flavor of essence to their haunt. So they'll just do it on purpose. They'll just leave and they come back and say, when I come back, I'm going to get a really nice, premium essence from this person because it's going to get this blend of fear, frustration, being defeated, depression because I don't know what to do, how do I get rid of these things, and so on. So as far as like cleaning the atmosphere, yeah, you can use dragon's blood. They still keep telling me that the sage thing is kind of a bust in a way, that it doesn't really work. But I know that First Nations people that I've known in the past, they would there was a certain place that they would collect a certain type of sage in a certain area that has a certain frequency. And I think that, I would believe in some sense that that did work at some point to clear a space, but never to actually get rid of an entity, because even with them, how do they know exactly who they're talking to? And there are some of them who say, well, sometimes you don't really know exactly who you're talking to. You have to be discerning as you can to find out whether you're getting truthful information or not. But most of the time, if you don't go through certain processes or routes, or if you believe in something that has been established as a process to get rid of or deal with, ghosts and dense energy and so on, you're basically adopting and basically embracing something that the density has fed you. Yeah, do this, that'll get rid of them. And say, oh, look, they're using the sage. Okay. So, well, some say, screw the sage, I'm not going anywhere. And there's a lot of stories like that. But then someone said, well, did you buy it or did someone gift it to you? Well, I bought it. Oh, that's why it's not working. But someone can gift it to you and it still won't work. But also one of the things that density has done, because they control people, there are places, I can't remember exactly, it was Arizona, a certain area in Arizona where there are certain group of First Nations people would get sage. And what did the system do? Oh, they decided to plow it up and put it in houses. So just destroying that whole area. In other words, just literally destroying their area, toxing the energy there. And of course, they're digging everything up. They're digging up all the sage that these folks use. So there are things that they smell nice, like myrrh, it's kind of nice. And it can have a relaxing effect on you, which means that it can clear I would say, the miasma from the matrix for a certain amount of time. Because as you know, when it comes to burning incense and using herbs, you have to keep using it. So I'm not saying that, not to use it, but it doesn't do exactly what some people think it does. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. All right, then we're going to go to the next question, and we're going to spin that wheel. Spin the wheel.
Oh.
What? Number 11. Oh, no wonder you fast.
Number 11. Ghosts close to black ooze.
Ghosts close to black ooze? Some are. and there are those who aren't. There's a hierarchical system amongst the ghosts. So as far as with my research and my interacting with them, there's a hierarchy. And a lot of times, you won't see those types of ghosts. Ones that are on the lower rungs can be like the shadow people, or just the, just pretty much ghosts who do, poltergeists can be on a lower level, but poltergeists sometimes what they need to build up a certain amount of energy, get a certain amount of energy from you so that they get to the point where they start moving things around. There are some that are on a higher level that does poltergeist activity who have enough energy already to start moving things around. So if you move into a new house and you find that, you put your keys down and then all of a sudden they're not there, which in the past I've had experiences like that where I had, had bought a new watch. I'm the only one in my apartment. I put that watch down and, the next morning it's gone. Now, I had deadbolts on my, on my doors. This was like in Brooklyn, so you had the, those gates over your windows. So the place was pretty secure. But I woke up, and and the watch was gone. Now, with that said, there are times that you have light beings, if you're fortunate enough, who will try to help you out. So I was wasn't sure after a while. I knew that density or spirits or whatever will do that type of thing because I've had it happen with smaller items. Sometimes like putting down a toothbrush on the sink and then washing your face and then looking and then it's gone, and you're the only one in the bathroom. But then later you'll find it somewhere else. Like sitting on the back of the toilet or something like that. I've had experiences like that, but I kind of got to the point where I felt that maybe it was light beings who were behind the watch thing, having to do with clocks and time. So, everyone has, or most people have, smartphones, and they have a clock on their phone. But when you have a watch, you're constantly like this, looking at the watch. When you have a phone that's in your pocket, and occasionally you'll pull it out to look and see what time it is. Also, you can set alarms and all that other cool stuff. But I believe at that particular experience, I kind of felt that it was something like light beings involved, having to do with me not stressing so much over time. Because I have to admit, almost every watch I've ever owned ended up losing it somehow or somewhere. But this one was the most interesting because the place was sealed up. I wake up and it's gone. So it wasn't like any trap attic doors or anything like that for anyone to come into my apartment and why would they take that when I had other stuff that was considered at the time I considered to be valuable that they didn't take. So I'm going to ask the question one more time. Can you read that question?
Goes close to black goose.
Are they close to black goose? Okay, well, I did pretty much answer, but get into a little bit more of the hierarchy of ghosts. There are those that are, let's kind of use the term like in companies or whatever, that are in management. And then there are those like, supervisors, and all they do is just keep an eye on the little guys running around. Okay, you guys are set to haunt this sector. You guys are, and then they ask their little, underlings, how's it going? How's the, how's the energy collecting going, and so on. So usually, if you would see one of these guys, a lot of times it would show up. They seem to have similar type of outfits. Some of them, where they can come through, and I don't know if you've ever seen ones with the white face thing, it's like one of those Halloween masks from those movies or whatever. Sometimes they have a drippy face. Some they just have a white face, or like, one of the Kiss performers of, that music group. And a lot of times also they wear cloaks. They like to wear cloaks and things like that. So when there were videos being caught in the last couple of years of these types of entities in people's houses haunting, they were coming in because the amount of essence was dropping. So they were coming in to see what was going on. And then, because they're professional haunters, they can, they can scare the poop out of anybody just about who's not, hip to them, which that's most people. And that's usually when you would see these types of entities are usually on a higher rung than the lower grunts. And yeah, the lower grunts, yeah, they can get tapped out at some point and they end up in the black ooze field. These guys, for the most part, their position is pretty secure. And also they organize how other entities haunt or who to choose from the density to be a ghost. So ghosts, as the density had told me, are just other dense entities. And this is their job. This is the job that they're doing. Okay.
So
Yes, ma'am.
would you say that those like entity that can move like the stuff around in people's houses and haunt them, are they on higher rank?
They would be on a higher rank than ones who will walk around and cause floors to creak and things like that. Yeah, like I said, there's various levels. It's just like any business or well, I use corporations as a example because corporations are based on the dense realm. So they have the sub levels. They have like the lowest level that they may be stacking boxes or being in the mailroom in a corporation or a company. So there's a lot of these guys, and they'll show up, and a lot of times they'll show up in out the corner of your eyes. Those tend to be lower levels, but they're higher level ones who will do the same thing. They can do the same thing, but the ones who are a little higher up, yeah, they can move stuff. Yeah. Yeah, but they have to work their way up to being in the hierarchy. So in the past, yeah, the more essence they got, the more of a chance it was just like in a corporation, more of a chance you might be able to move up the ladder. And then next thing you're over others who are doing the job that you used to do. Okay.
So if people are not fearful, then it would be waste of their effort.
Yeah, and the thing with fear, it's a difficult one because fear is like a component that is basically injected into every consciousness that is in the matrix. And you really, with me, it had to do with, I replaced fear with anger. And I know that there are some psychics in the past who say, "Whoa, I don't know if they were psychics or whatever, but they thought they were." And they say, "Oh, don't get angry. If you get angry, they'll get angrier." And so I was doing a lot of research back, way back when. And, I read that and they say, well, if you get angry, they'll just get worse. So I would try to keep from getting angry, but I would tell them, if I have like a sleep paralysis and I feel something, pushing down on me on my bed, I would literally just try to vocally say, get out of here or get off of me. And so at one point, I was getting really dogpiled. At one point, I had a studio in upstate, and my studio had a stream that ran on the other side of it, which is a dragon line or a ley line. Things, entities use it kind of like a highway, like a pathway. And sometimes I'd be in there working late at night doing deadlines and so on, and I just I'd have to take a break, and sometimes I would work 2 days straight without sleep. So the point where I just had to lay down, and I had a mat that I would just lay down on, and I lay down on that mat, and for some reason it felt like that whole studio was full of some things, and they were all focusing their attention on me. So how I believe it's in my book, but how I got through it, I just literally like, I'm really sick of this. How do I deal with this? And how the information came in, it said, you got to get angry. And once I got angry, yeah, they kind of ramped it up a little bit, but then I stayed angry, but then I started devising ways of hitting them back. So how a person is acclimated to dealing with things as a human, I take my fist and I punch, or I go to some spiritualists and I use these herbs and I use some fetish and I put it around my neck and so on and so forth. Which you be careful. I would say don't use fetishes anyway. There's a lot of fetishes. People came into a studio when I was doing a lot of work in my in my home, which I don't do that kind of work anymore because people bring too much crap in, and then I have to spend time kicking all their stuff out into the vortex and no return. Because they would find, oh, hell, he's got more energy than they do. Let me just hang out with him. Then I just have to okay, I can feel you, I'm sending you, but I had to devise ways, experiment with ways of dealing with them. So I started to literally see myself throwing them into a vortex. And then I realized, oh, I'm doing that with my mind. So can I basically design the kind of vortex that I want? It's kind of a clunky name, the vortex and no return, maybe a little corny, but literally it works. And it worked for me. And it evolved on its own. When I first started doing it, some contraptions showed up in my mind that had this kind of like a horn thing, but it would suck things into it. So I would take whatever the density or the ghost even, put it, grab hold of it. I say, I am grabbing hold of you now. Vortex no return. Gone. So by the time I had really devised it, and it's to its most effective at this point now. It's a hell of a lot more effective than it was back then, and it was effective back then. How effective it was by the time, after about 2 years of me dealing with them that way, when I walk into a room, I'm very sensitive, so I could feel things. I would always feel things before I would see them. And I have seen those, what would consider ghosts, but I would always feel them first. So I would walk into a room, I would feel them, but it was one of these things, you walk into a space and they would scatter. So after a while, they wouldn't mess with me. And those of you who've had sessions with Miss Oracle, she's an intense seer. So there's times that she would see a spirit, say, oh, there's a ghost, he's coming, and sitting right next to you. I said, why are you telling me this shit? But anyway, this ghost is coming, he's sitting right next to you. I said, well, at this point, I said, oh yeah? Oh, you're trying to scare me? Try again. In my son unit, he was, maybe in his maybe early teens at the time. We'd be watching a movie in the guest room or something. And she said, oh, there's something, and he's sitting between you and Kai. And I said, oh, really? Is he here? Like here? And she said, oh, he's getting angry. Oh, he's getting angry? Like this, like this. And then Kai would just literally think, yeah, how about this? How about this? No, they weren't really afraid of him. They really tried to attack him. And he had some poltergeist stuff going on, banging under his bed. But when he called me in, and that story's in my book too, I would come in and I would deal with it. But one of the things having to do with fear of death. That's the basis of fear. Fear of pain, fear of death. Something that happens in the Matrix all the time is that at some point of how the Matrix works, your avatar will transition. You will transition out of here. In other words, there's no way of getting around it. Even if you live to be 100 and something or whatever, at some point, you're going to transition. So for me, why be afraid of something that's inevitable? Many consciousness go out as babies. So why should I be afraid? So again, in my book, I said, well, if you're so big and bad, he's banging this thing, banging on the floor. I said, there's no pipes under there. There's nothing under that would make that kind of noise. So I crawled under and I said, well, um, you know, if you're so bad, why don't you kill me? Which raised the hairs on the back of Ms. L's neck. She was living with us at the time. I said, why don't you kill me? I said, because you know what? Go ahead, kill me. Because you know what's going to happen? And I think I've told this story before. If you can, I'm going to be on the other side with you. And I've told the story before. I don't need to feel about it. So literally, it has to do with understanding that you know there's an illogical sense of fear amongst people in the matrix. And sometimes with that fear, you open yourself up to things that might not happen to you if you lack the fear of it. And I'm not talking about, you know, these thrill seekers and do just crazy shit. That's their jockeys just telling them to do crazy stuff. You know, if you're someone who's balanced in a certain way and you're logical, not human logic or matrix logic, because the matrix logic is not logical. You know, hit him before he hits you. I said, well, the reality of the matter is that you're all messed up. And if you were balanced, nobody needs to hit anybody. Or don't you feel alive when you're, you know, when you're cliff diving and all this stuff? I said, I don't need to do any stuff like that. You know, I mean, I've watched the videos of people, you know, running off the edge of a cliff with a hang glider and so on, or these guys who, yeah, I mean, there's some cultural rituals where they got bungee jumping from. I forgot exactly what country it's from, but it's a melanated country where it's a part of rites of passage where they wrapped the vines around the young man's ankles. And a lot of times the rites of passage would always be somewhere like when they're around 13, which I guess when they would assume that they're going to reach puberty, which means there's an energy change or whatever. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't really looked into why those rituals are considered to be, you know, useful to them or density. But those are things that I look at and say, interesting. You want to do it? Nope. Why? You know, is it going to make me a more enlightened being? Is you know, if people want to think that that's makes, you know, that's fun for them, which is basically if your jockey thinks that's fun and you're so tapped into your jockey, you're going to do whatever you're going to do anyway. But anyway, anyone have any questions? Or did I answer the question?
Yes,
Okay. Okay. So we can move on to the next question and we're going to spin that wheel. Spin wheel. Number one, question number one.
Do oligos interact or play tricks on animals as well?
Yes, they do. They will mess with an animal because an animal is consciousness. Everything that moves is some kind of fragment of a consciousness. As humans are fragments of their higher self. So you're all fragments of the consciousness. So the individual would say, "Oh, you know, dogs don't have a soul." You know, they're talking from their jockey's butt, literally. Everything has a consciousness, whether you want to call it a soul, whatever. Which I don't even, you know, they use that word in so many ways. It's almost like using the word love. It's like whatever, man. It's alive, and if you weren't so freaking dense, you would see the personality in that animal. And there are people who have pets who know that that pet has a personality. It has its likes, its dislikes. Some are cool, some are jerks, just like people. Anything as small as like a hamster has its own little personality. So it depends on who and what animal they decide to to haunt or harass. I mean, I've had experiences with animals that have been possessed. And sometimes you can tell it's like when you look at a person, I don't know if sometimes people are looking at people who are possessed, but they aren't really registering it when somebody's acting pretty bizarre. But there are those who said, I look in that person's eyes and they don't seem to be themselves, because they're not themselves. Something is basically, pushed whoever was in the driver's seat aside and decided they're going to take the wheel. So same thing can happen in animals. I had a dog that was a family dog, and I realized after a certain point that it was being possessed. And as again, Ms. L was staying with us at the time, and they very much know that she's very intense. She can see a lot more than most people can see in this world. So something would get in that dog, and he would harass her. And his name was Moto. And at one point she said, hey, Moto, cut it out. And so he speaks to her in her mind and says, my name's not Moto, my name's Bob. Hey, Bob. Okay. So I would, so when he would get kind of weird, I would grab hold of him and I'd look at him in his eyes, and either the left or the right eye would be cloudy. And then I said, oh, okay. I think when I see cloudiness in his eyes, you're possessed, aren't you? So once he comes, trotting up or whatever, and he's possessed, I know he's possessed. I said, hey, Bob, I know you're in there. And he got a guilty look on his face and left the room. I've had animals, wild animals. I've had, when we lived in a rural area and upstate. And I've had foxes that will come by that were possessed by something. They didn't behave properly. The fox is on my deck, and I was like, okay, you need to get off the deck. I got kids running around here. So I tap on the window on the door. Okay, skedaddle. He just looked at me, and then walk up to the window and look at me. I said, what kind of freaking fox are you? So anyway, I was just like, he's not gonna go. So I just tell him, say, look, there's a fox on the deck. Don't go outside for a while. And eventually he will leave. So there was a garden in front of the house that had two gates, which I basically put in the fence around the garden. And it had two gates, one on one side, one on the other side. And the ex-wife, his mother, was in there with them one day. And they see a fox slowly strolling towards one of the gates, taking his own good old time. And so she ran it and she closed that gate. And then he slowly walks around to try to come in through the other gate. She goes and closes, and she's doing stuff like, making noise to try to get them, to leave. And, I guess after a while, I figured, I guess they're not going to open the gate so I can freak them out even more and get that essence. He just finally strolled off into the woods. I had this one is going to be the last one, but incident with there was a new neighbor in the neighborhood, and they had this little English bulldog. Kind of odd looking bulldog because it was like a calico color, but it was a little English bulldog type dog. And he showed up, and he just was a little too familiar. And Moto, as much as he would get possessed, he went to charge the dog. He was a little dog. He's like a Boston Terrier. And he's like, "Arr!" And this dog just kind of walked towards him calmly and just started sniffing him. And Moto ran away. And I said, okay. I said, this dog's energy feels weird anyway. So I was trying to find something to just chase him off. And I couldn't find any, that's why it's good to invest in baseball bats. But anyway, I really found this long ass, PVC pipe. So I'm like, with this pipe. I said, okay, get gone. Hit the pipe. And he just slowly goes, oh, I guess they don't want me around. So he decides casually walks a little bit, then he turns around and I go, whap again. Then he walks a little bit more, he turns around and says, you're getting on my freaking nerves. So I'm trying to swing to hit this thing. And then finally he left. So he showed up a couple times in his weird condition. And so maybe it might have been like a week or two later, I'm walking my dog down the mountain, down the road, and come across these folks who just moved in the area, and they had two dogs, and that dog was one of the dogs. And that dog did not act as though he ever met me or Mota. Totally different. So when it comes to whether animals can be haunted, yeah. As far as like even if you read certain stories where dogs, for instance, or cats will watch something in a corner that that you can't see with your naked eye, or there are dogs that walk into a space, and whatever the energy of that particular entity is so intense that the dog won't stay in that room. And I had a cat who would do the same thing. Whenever the kid's mother would leave and take them with her, on a trip for a couple days, I'd be there by myself. I didn't have a problem being there by myself, but my cat, which was my cat, Bugs, would always hang around me. He's always hanging out with me, and we were cool. But whenever she would leave, he would come into the room, the bedroom, and he'd look around and he would leave. Every time she was gone, he would never stay near me because I was being swarmed at the time. So they do get afraid, they do get, something will scare them and they will react. And also, they do, will mess with an animal. They will mess with an animal. Okay. So any questions on that? All right. Okay.
457.
Okay. We're going to go for the next question and spin that wheel. This will be the last question for this session. Question 9.
It's other occasion when humans believe they're seeing a ghost in a certain space, but nothing is actually there.
If a person is seeing something out of the periphery of their eyes or something like that, there's something there. Most times, if you're not sensitive enough, there's always something there. There are things that would be considered attachments that some will consider, in other words, they would think of it as a ghost because sometimes it may show itself, but it's just a name for another way of getting essence, to tell you the truth. So there are many times where, you will feel something, or you will hear some noise. As far as like people, well, I don't know what part of society, and I think it's more West, where they will kind of see something, but if they can't look in some book that some talking head wrote or whatever, or some talking head so-called psychic wrote or whatever, well, they won't actually, they're usually not into the psychic stuff anyway, into the metaphysical. They're I'm into science, and give me a break, science doesn't explain everything, and it never will. So they'll say, well, I think I'm imagining something. I'm imagining things. If you're like that, boy, they're going to get a lot of this inside of you, because they can just keep messing with you, messing with you, messing with you. And each time they mess with you, they get a bit more, a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more. And the number of stories that I've heard of individuals say, well, I'm a skeptic. Don't be so freaking proud. Everybody should be skeptical to some degree, even if you believe in ghosts and mysticism. You should be skeptical to some degree. But I'm a skeptic. I believe in science, and oh, screw yourself. You're not impressing me. Just tell me that you're too stupid to think for yourself. So they'll just deny that it's happening. But in the end, the density will win. In the end, they will make you believe that they're there after a certain point. Because they're going for, they say, okay, now for the big reveal, I'm going to get a whole lot of essence out of this sucker. They rub their little ghost hands together, and then boom, here I am. And these guys tend to kind of lose their minds a bit because they're too much of a box head. They seal themselves up in some concepts and think that they're safe, that somewhere in the matrix, somebody has all the answers. Give me a break. There's so much that goes on out there on the other side. And like I said, they don't do exactly the same thing. They don't haunt exactly the same thing. They custom design their haunts to each individual. Okay. I could probably maybe go a little bit longer with it, but I think right there, I think I'll leave it there for the moment. And we still have some more questions having to do with ghosts, and we can continue this on the next forum. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chief.
They're all silent.
Thank you.
Hope it ain't creep you out too much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Everyone take care. I'll talk to you later.